My life was a carefully constructed mosaic of peace and tranquility. A well-paying, if unremarkable, job provided the financial stability I needed to secure a comfortable home in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, a far cry from the chaotic city, streets I'd grown up on. Finally, after years of diligent saving, I achieved my ambition: the installation of a beautiful azure pool in my backyard. It wasn't some sprawling resort-style monstrosity, just a modest-sized rectangle of shimmering water that offered solace from the summer heat and a place for my beloved nieces to frolic and play during their visits. The pool wasn't just a recreational amenity. It was a symbol of my hard work, my independence, and the simple pleasures I valued in life. The sounds of splashing laughter and the gentle lapping of water against the tiles were the soundtrack to my newfound peace. However, the idyllic bubble was about to burst with the arrival of a new neighbor. Karen, as she soon made herself known, was the embodiment of suburban stereotype turned nightmare. Her immaculate lawn was adorned with an unsettling number of political signs espousing exclusionary viewpoints, and her windows seemed perpetually occupied by her watchful gaze, binoculars seemingly glued to her face. From the moment the moving truck unloaded her belongings, she made it abundantly clear that I, Anthony Reed, did not fit into her meticulously curated vision of the neighborhood. My music, played at a reasonable volume, was deemed disturbing. The infrequent gatherings with my family were labeled noisy parties. Everything I did seemed to be a personal affront to her sensibilities. But her true obsession, the bane of her existence, was my pool. She complained incessantly about it, claiming it was an eyesore that ruined her bedroom view. She'd stand by the fence, stopwatch in hand, meticulously documenting the duration of my niece's innocent splashing sessions. Her presence cast a long, dark shadow over what was meant to be my sanctuary. I tried to ignore her, to brush off her petty grievances as the ramblings of a disgruntled busybody, but her relentless harassment was starting to wear me down. I longed for the quiet life I had worked so hard to create, but Karen seemed determined to shatter it into a million pieces. Little did I know. Her obsession went far beyond verbal complaints and passive-aggressive surveillance. The situation escalated from irritating to outright bizarre when I discovered that Karen's complaints were merely a smokescreen for a far more disturbing behavior. She was trespassing on my property and using my pool without my permission. The discovery was accidental, a consequence of my growing paranoia and the installation of security cameras to document her harassment. At first, the footage seemed unremarkable, just Karen lurking near the fence, peering over with a disapproving frown. But then, one night, I saw it. A shadowy figure slipping through my gate, drawn by the allure of the moonlit water. I zoomed in, my heart pounding in my chest, and there she was, Karen, clad in a bathrobe, gingerly dipping her feet into my pool. I was stunned, bewildered, and frankly disgusted. This wasn't just a neighborly dispute, it was a blatant violation of my privacy and a complete disregard for my property rights. The audacity of her actions was breathtaking. I confronted her the next day, armed with the damning video evidence, but she simply dismissed it as a harmless dip and launched into another tirade about community rights and the absurdity of claiming ownership over water. Her logic was twisted, her entitlement boundless. She seemed to genuinely believe that because the pool was visible from her property, she had some sort of inherent right to access it. The more I tried to reason with her, the more irrational she became. She accused me of being selfish, of hoarding a public resource, and even suggested that I should be grateful she was maintaining the pool for me. The confrontations became a regular occurrence, each one more absurd and infuriating than the last. I felt trapped in a surreal comedy, a Kafkaesque nightmare where my neighbor's delusional entitlement was slowly eroding my sanity. Her actions were not only illegal and disrespectful, but incredibly unnerving. My safe haven had been breached, and I no longer felt comfortable in my own backyard. I started locking my gate at all times, double-checking the security cameras every night, and avoiding the pool area altogether. Karen had effectively stolen my peace of mind, transforming my dream of a tranquil life into its constant state of anxiety and vigilance. The relentless harassment and the brazen trespassing had taken their toll. The joy I once felt when looking at my pool had been replaced by a simmering resentment. The laughter of my nieces now echoed with a hint of anxiety. I was tired, emotionally drained, and desperate for a solution. I considered filing a police report, but I knew that a trespassing charge would likely result in nothing more than a slap on the wrist. I thought about building a taller fence, but I refused to let Karen dictate the aesthetics of my own property. Finally, I arrived at a drastic decision. If I couldn't enjoy my pool in peace, then no one would. I decided to drain it. The idea was born out of frustration, a desperate attempt to regain control of my life and reclaim my sanity. I rationalized it by telling myself that the pool needed to be cleaned anyway, that it was simply a matter of routine maintenance. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was an act of defiance, a symbolic gesture of protest against Karen's relentless intrusion. Over the course of a weekend, I methodically emptied the pool. The gurgling sound of the draining water seemed to echo my own sense of frustration and exhaustion. As the water level receded, the pristine blue surface transformed into a murky, algae-stained void.
Ouchies.
The patio furniture was banished to the garage. The gate was locked with a resounding clunk, and the once inviting backyard was transformed into a desolate landscape. I knew that my actions would provoke a reaction from Karen, but I underestimated the sheer magnitude of her response. I anticipated complaints, accusations, and perhaps even another trespassing incident. But what transpired the following morning was beyond anything I could have imagined. Her reaction would ultimately lead to her downfall. A downfall as I became a witness to it while in my own property. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that would usually beckon me to my pool. But instead, I found myself on edge, anticipating the inevitable confrontation with Karen. I didn't have to wait long. As I was sipping my coffee, I heard a commotion outside. Peering through the window, I saw Karen marching towards my gate, clad in full beach attire, flip-flops, a brightly colored towel draped over her shoulder, and oversized sunglasses perched on her nose. She looked like she was heading to a luxury resort, completely oblivious to the reality awaiting her. With a dramatic flourish, she flung open her beach bag, presumably to retrieve her sunscreen and a refreshing beverage. But as she approached the gate and her eyes fell upon the empty pool, her demeanor instantly transformed. The carefully constructed facade of suburban bliss crumbled, revealing the simmering cauldron of rage and entitlement that lay beneath. Stopped dead in her tracks, her mouth agape, her sunglasses askew. For a moment, she simply stood there, frozen in disbelief. Then the storm broke. She began banging on the gate with her fists, screaming at the top of her lungs. Her words were a jumbled mess of accusations, insults, and threats. She accused me of wasting precious water, of being vindictive and spiteful, and of deliberately trying to ruin her day. Her voice was shrill and piercing, carrying far beyond my property lines. I could only imagine what the other neighbors were thinking. But the truly shocking moment came, when she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was telling the dispatcher that I had emptied a public pool without a permit, and that a violent man is tampering with city property. She described me as a dangerous menace, a threat to the entire neighborhood. Her lies were so blatant, so absurd, that I almost started laughing. But the gravity of the situation quickly sunk in. She was using the emergency services to weaponize her personal vendetta, potentially putting my safety and reputation at risk. The reality of what was happening became very clear as the screeches became louder. The police were coming. Within minutes, the tranquil suburban street was transformed into a scene of flashing lights and blaring sirens. 3 squad cars screeched to a halt in front of my house, their presence adding a surreal and chaotic element to the already bizarre situation. I emerged from my house, my hands raised in a gesture of peace, and calmly approached the officers. I introduced myself, showed them my ID, and explained that I was the homeowner and that the pool in question was located on my private property. Karen, meanwhile, was still ranting and raving, waving her arms like a conductor leading a chaotic orchestra. She reiterated her fabricated claims. insisting that I had violated some obscure city ordinance and that my actions were a threat to the community. The officers listened patiently, their expressions unreadable. It was clear that they were used to dealing with these types of neighborhood disputes. But even they seemed slightly bewildered by the sheer absurdity of Karen's accusations. One of the officers, an older gentleman with a weary but kind face, approached me and asked if I had any security cameras on the property. I nodded and invited him inside to review the footage. As we watched the recorded events of the past few weeks, a palpable shift occurred in the officer's demeanor. He saw Karen trespassing, not just dipping her feet but swimming laps in my pool. Under the cover of darkness, he saw her bring in a wine glass and a floating tray for a midnight soak. But the most damning evidence was the footage of her letting her dog swim in my pool, not once but twice. The officer watched in stunned silence as the dog gleefully paddled around, shedding hair and leaving muddy paw prints in its wake. The final indignity was when the dog exited the pool and shook itself dry, splattering water all over my patio cushions. The officer turned to me, his eyes wide with disbelief. Didn't say a word, but his expression spoke volumes. He had seen enough. The tables had turned. The officer, flanked by his colleagues, stepped back outside to confront Karen with the evidence. The color drained from her face as she realized that her carefully constructed narrative had been exposed as a pack of lies. She stammered, she stuttered, she tried to backtrack, but the officers were having none of it. They asked her to explain the footage, to justify her actions. But she could only offer a series of incoherent denials and increasingly outlandish excuses. As the reality of her situation dawned on her, she attempted to flee. She made a desperate dash towards her house, but her flip-flops betrayed her. She slipped on the wet grass, lost her balance, and landed squarely on her back, her phone flying out of her hand and shattering against a flower pot. The officers helped her to her feet, their expressions a mixture of amusement and exasperation. They didn't arrest her, but they did issue a formal trespass warning, informing her that any further attempts to enter my property would result in criminal charges. They also warned her that any future misuse of emergency services would be met with severe consequences. Humiliated and defeated, Karen retreated to her house, muttering about poisoning the neighborhood spirit and attacking on a gift from the community. As the police cars drove away, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The nightmare was finally over. I rebuilt my pool, making it deeper and adding powerful jets. I also installed a full privacy wall, ensuring that Karen would never again be able to glimpse my private sanctuary. And, just for good measure, I added motion sensors, a subtle but effective deterrent. I haven't seen Karen near the fence since. My life finally returned to the peaceful tranquility I had always desired. In the end, Karen's own actions led to her downfall, and I was able to reclaim my peace and quiet.